Okay, we've all been there at one point or another where we've gone out recording in windy conditions and then we've gone back to edit it and we found that our audio is completely unusable. And this is particularly the case when it comes to action cameras, and there are a lot of people out there really struggling to get decent audio when it's windy. So what can we do about this? How can we get around this problem? Well, there are a few things that we can do right from the very beginning that don't require any special equipment, that gives us the best chance of getting audio that is at the very least usable with an action camera. So some of the things that we can do are very basic, but give us the best chance of getting a decent audio signal into the camera. And one of the primary things that we can do when we know that it's getting pretty windy is simply to get closer to the camera. Sometimes we need to temper our expectations somewhat, and we have to adapt to the situation. So when the wind gets up and we might want to do a shot from a selfie pole that's held away from us, we need to understand that that isn't going to give the camera the best chance of recording strong voice audio in that particular situation. So we need to temper our expectations somewhat and adapt to the situation at hand and bring the camera closer to us so that it's got a much better chance of picking up our voice. Another obvious thing that we can do when it becomes windy, as well as bringing the camera closer to us or the microphone closer to us, we can just speak loudly. We can just speak more loudly than we would do usually. And if you watch any reporter reporting from the middle of a hurricane or something, you'll notice that they're shouting pretty loudly, and that's because they know that there are going to be problems when it comes to picking up the voice audio, despite the fact that they have much better equipment than a lot of people who are just going out with their action camera. Audio causes professionals problems as well. Even with the best equipment in the world, when the wind gets to a certain speed, it's always going to cause issues that have to be worked around. Now, most action cameras these days have wind reduction settings built in, and it's always tempting to use these, but in my experience, they don't usually do a very good job. And that's because what they're doing is modifying the frequencies in the audio. They're trying to filter out the wind by ditching some of the frequencies in that audio, and that's why you can end up with a very robotic sounding voice, a very metallic sounding audio. In my experience, I haven't had much luck getting very usable audio out of these systems, and on the Osmo Action 6 it's particularly bad and just isn't very effective at all. In fact, I found the Osmo Action 5 Pro was actually better at dealing with windy situations than the Action 6. But that's maybe for another video. Now, one of the best action cameras on the market for dealing with windy situations right out of the box is Insta360's Ace Pro 2, and that's because it has a physical wind filter on the front of the camera, and then it can use the digital processing afterwards to further reduce the effects of the wind. But the fact that it's got a physical wind filter on the front is doing a lot of the heavy lifting there, and accounts for one of the reasons why the Ace Pro 2 is so good in windy situations. Under the sun, minus 0.7 EV, standard colour profile on all cameras. Under the sun, minus 0.7 EV, standard colour profile on all cameras. It's on minus 0.7 EV, standard colour profile on all cameras. Now, if you're on the top of a mountain and it's blowing an absolute hoolie, there are limitations to what that can do, but it is a pretty good starting point that the other action cameras on the market just don't have. But that brings me to one of the next things that we can do, and that is putting a physical wind filter on the camera. Now, you can get these adhesive, what we call dead cats. I've got this on the DJI Mic 2. You can get these in a little adhesive form that you can stick on the front of an action camera and drastically reduce the amount of wind that is affecting the audio. Now, how effective this is depends on the action camera, because some action cameras have their microphones better placed than others. So for example, on the DJI Action 6, on the base there is a microphone, there's also a microphone on the top. And there's one, I think there was one on the front as well, and there's one on the side here as well. You really would need to put one of these sticky wind filters on each one of these microphones, but the problem with the Action 6 is that the one on the base actually interferes with the position of the magnetic mount. So that can be a bit of a problem, but if you can stick one of these little mini dead cats onto the microphones of an Action camera, you will immediately get much better results from that camera in windy conditions. Now, there is a drawback to using physical wind filters like this, and that is that they're not very effective in wet weather or in water sports. In fact, in water sports, they are completely ineffective. Once they become sodden with water, their effectiveness goes to pretty much zero. So that is something to bear in mind with these physical wind filters. So if you're in Thailand doing a vlog, or any other country that has a monsoon season and you're going to get absolutely soaked, then you're going to have to temper your expectations as to what you can do audio wise with regards to reducing wind noise with the camera alone. But as I say, you can use some of the basic techniques I've mentioned at the head of this video to give yourself the best chance of recording usable audio. Now, the absolute best solution is to use what the professionals do, and that is external audio. Now, professionals will use something like this. And this is a wind blimp, and the microphone goes inside it, and that on its own actually does a really good job at reducing wind. And then you can put a dead cat on the outside of it, and you can pretty much eliminate wind altogether. It works in very high wind situations, but that's not very practical for using with an Action camera. So what you have here is the DJI Mic 3, and there are quite a few of these external microphones available now for Action cameras. You've got the DJI series, which includes the Mic 3, the Mic 2, and the Mic Mini. And you've also got Insta360's Mic Air as well, which is also very good. Now, which one you get will actually depend on the Action camera you own, because they generally only connect to their respective proprietary cameras to give full quality audio. Now, if you're going to use a DJI mic with the Ace Pro 2, you'll need to use the USB receiver to plug into it. You can use the DJI mic with the GoPro Hero 13, but it will only give you 16 kilohertz audio over Bluetooth. But there is a solution to that as well, which I'll come to in just a moment. Now, the great thing about these microphones with the wind filter on is that they're mounted to your body. They're close to you. They're very close to where the sound is emanating from, i.e. your voice. So they're always going to be in a prime position to pick up your voice, no matter how windy the conditions become. Now, there are limits to this. If you get extreme wind conditions, then you are still going to hear wind noise. The thing to understand about filtering wind noise out of audio is that the aim isn't always to completely eliminate the wind sound. It's about reducing the effect of the wind on the audio to the point where you get a usable voice recording. It's not always desirable to completely eliminate your environmental sounds anyway. If it is blowing an absolute hoolie, then you might actually really want to have some of that on the audio. So it isn't really about completely eliminating the wind noise. That shouldn't really be your aim. If it is, you're going to be quite disappointed, particularly when the wind really does get up. But with an external microphone like this, again, you give yourself the best chance. And with microphones like the Mic Air and the DJI Mic Mini being available from between £40 to £60 depending on the configuration you get, if you're serious about doing vlogging and recording good audio, then it's a fairly small investment to make for a very big gain. What I would say is that the DJI Mic 3 and the Mic 2 have an advantage that the other mic models don't have, and that is what I'm doing now. I'm recording this audio in 32-bit float to the microphone itself. So that gives me a separate audio file I can use with my video later. So what's the significance of having 32-bit float audio? Most standard audio is recorded in 24 bits. So in 24 bits, which is what most audio is recorded in, once you reach a certain loudness level, the audio will peak and then it'll clip. and any signal that goes above that clipping point is completely lost. So for example, if you've ever spoken extremely loudly into a microphone, you might have noticed that your voice sounds distorted, and that's because you've peaked the audio, and any audio information above a certain loudness level is not being recorded, it's just being completely cut off and lost in the ether. So 32-bit float gives you a massive overhead. It's almost impossible to peak the audio on a 32-bit float recording system, and this is important because in a very windy situation, when the wind is buffeting the microphone, it can actually peak the audio and you get that clipped information. And so when you're using a filter later on to filter out the wind frequencies to try and reduce it in post, a lot of the information that you need to be able to filter out the wind is simply not there anymore. So 32-bit float effectively acts a bit like a camera's dynamic range. So obviously if you've got a camera with a very high dynamic range, it can record very high contrast situations without blowing out the sky. In other words, it can handle a very wide range from very dark to very bright, and it's the same with 32-bit float. 32-bit float gives you an overhead that you can recover in post. You can bring that audio down and recover any information that would ordinarily have gone above that clipping point, and that gives you a lot more information to play with when it comes to filtering out wind which might have otherwise blown out the audio on any other system. So when we're recording audio in very windy situations, it is about giving ourselves the best chance. We sometimes have to temper our expectations somewhat as well. We have to compromise. Sometimes we have to accept that we're not going to be able to eliminate all of that wind noise altogether. But if we know the situation that we're going into is going to produce very challenging conditions like that, then something else we can do is just plan around it. We can maybe consider doing voiceover for the video later, have that in mind when we're filming. Or say, for example, you're doing a vlogging shot and ordinarily you might want to show a wide shot of you talking to camera with all the landscape behind you. You might have to change that to getting a closer up shot of you to get the camera closer to you if you don't have an external microphone, and then getting a separate shot, a GV or a general view as we call it, of the landscape that you can edit in separately. So again, we need to look at the situation we're in and we have to work around it. It is about compromise. We can't often be chasing perfection in those sorts of situations. So with regard to action cameras in their default setting, if you don't have an external microphone, do you or do you not use the wind filter settings that are built into that camera? And it depends really on how experienced you are, how advanced you are. If you're not technically minded, if you're not into doing video editing and that sort of stuff, then you can use the wind filter settings in the camera. But as I say, temper your expectations about what's possible and use those tips that I gave you about speaking more loudly and getting the camera closer to you in order to give your camera the best chance of picking up your voice. So I hope that's helped a little bit for beginners who might be struggling with this. It is a difficult situation to overcome, and as I say, don't expect perfection. You have to work around it and give your audio the best chance. And if you can, use an external mic system like this. It will improve your audio hugely if you do, but as I say, there are still some limitations, particularly when it comes to water sports and wet weather situations. I would love for GoPro or one of the other companies to come up with a fully waterproof external audio system for their action cameras. I think it would be absolutely amazing if they did that, but we're going to be waiting quite a long time from the look of it, but hopefully one of the manufacturers will take it on board at some point. But anyway, I hope that's helped for now. I know some of these solutions that I've given are not perfect, but as I say, we have to work with the limitations that we are given. So anyway, if you found this video useful, give me a like and maybe even subscribe if you like the rest of my content and want to hear more from me. I'm going to be doing more of these action camera basics videos and as well as some more advanced ones as well for more advanced users in 2026. So stay tuned for that. But anyway, I'll see you in the next video.